Online Championship Season 11 kicked off in Le Mans Ultimate, and so did the ELMS World Tour. This is the online team championship, which I'll be racing in with my teammate Oskar. Round 1 takes us into the desert to the Lusail International Circuit, or otherwise known as Qatar, for a 4-hour race. Our car of choice is the Aston Martin Vantage, and since I tend to be slightly quicker, I have the honor of doing qualifying for us. The conditions for this qualifying session are quite hot, essentially giving me just 2 push laps after an outlap and 1 further warm-up lap. However, this does kind of work in our favor, but I'll tell you more about that in a little bit. But before I go on and on and on, let me just show you my final and fastest lap of this qualifying session. On screen, you're also seeing the Track Titan live coaching overlay, similar to the new Go Setups overlay, which I decided to just try out in this session. No!
No! Yes! No!
No! So, a 1 minute 55.002. Not quite the 54.9 I was aiming for, but it gave us pole position in the end, so it literally couldn't be any better. And remember a bit ago when I told you that our 4-lap qualifying session actually kind of works in our favor? You see, for this entire event, we actually only had 14 tires available, which means that sooner or later we would have to put the qualifying tires back onto the car. And for us, this is a huge advantage. We only drove 4 laps on these qualifying tires, while some of the other teams did 5, 6, 7, some even 8 laps on these qualifying tires, which they would have to use again later in the race. So before the race even started, we had already gained a tire advantage. But with qualifying done, you now join me for the race start. With everyone around me basically being Porsches, I was only really worried about the BMW right behind, since that was the only car that could really rival me off of the line.
Okay, good luck.
Thank you.
Green flag.
Oh my
green
god.
flag.
Oh, so early. Oh, there goes the BMW. Straight past the Porsche. So coming up to turn 1 here, the LMP3s do check up a little bit, but after the first few corners, everything kind of untangles itself and we get settled into the race. The trickiest bit at this stage was actually getting the tires at the temperature. The Aston kind of struggles with that at race starts, and the Porsches behind were definitely looking racy, and I was also suspecting that those were going to be starting on new tires instead of the qualifying tires that we were starting on. With that said, the expectation going into this first stint wasn't to set the best lap times or to keep track position, it was to simply stay alive on the qualifying tires, which were always going to perform worse than starting on new tires, and still get the 28 laps out of the stint, while not losing too much time. But then at the end of lap 2, the inevitable happens. I get a bad run through sector 3, the Porsche manages to catch up and actually overtake me around the outside of the final corner. At this point, I decide I'm not going to fight it too much, since this was going to happen sooner or later anyways, but I'm still not going to just let him have the position. So coming up to turn 1, I do try to squeeze him to the inside. He is having none of this, so we bang doors a few times, and then going into turn 1, the green Porsche behind actually sees his opportunity and slips one up the inside, which honestly I can't even mad about. Good opportunistic driving. So at this point I'm still trying to hold on a little bit, but now I just think, okay, I'll let him go. I don't want to let this BMW go as well, but from here on I'll just let them have it and just settle into my race. For the rest of the stint, nothing really special happens. We get the first few rounds of traffic, which pass by relatively normally, but then at the end of lap 25, I just lose the car. Looking back at the footage, I don't even really know why. The only thing I could somewhat see is the state of the tires, as you can see in the bottom left, and maybe having a little bit too much throttle, but at this point I'm just happy that I didn't hit the wall and we didn't have to repair any damage. So fast forward to the end of lap 28, I finally bring the car into the pits after a painful first stint. I also take it super easy on the pit entry because I don't want to accidentally speed going into the pits on these bad tires, and just there we're actually passing the green Porsche from the start. They pitted a lap or two before us and we don't really know what happened. They were just stationary for a really long time. But now with Oskar in the car, our goals changed a little bit. We changed 4 tires, the cars around us didn't, and even if they did, they already had a few more laps on them, meaning they already had temperature in their tires. Which means that over the course of the next 2 or 3 warm-up laps, Oskar was actually going to lose 2 more positions, which he would then have to later take back on the track. Just 4 laps later, we'd already caught back up to the first of the 2 cars, making quick work of the Porsche on the main straight, relying on the Aston's superior top speed. But he also didn't fight it very much, considering we were on slightly different strategies. It then actually took until lap 51 to catch back up with the next car, but at this point we were on much better tires, so it only took Oskar a few cars behind the BMW to make a move stick, and then move back into position number 4. The rest of Oskar's 2 stints was quite uneventful. Between saving fuel and saving tires, Oskar managed to be the fastest car on track at one point, and then nothing really happened until lap 74. We hadn't really paid attention until this point, but P2 was already out of fuel, and they had to come into pit about 10 laps too early, which then put us back on the bottom step of the podium just a few seconds later. But this actually wasn't as big of a strategy mistake as it may seem at first glance. You see, the race was always going to have 121 laps, which means if you wanted to take full fuel at each pit stop, you would be doing 4 full stints and a shorter 10-lap splash and dash at the end. But you can also do that 10-lap splash earlier in the race, and so we think this is what the number 33 Porsche did. But this actually does give me an idea. Oskar is pitting at the end of lap 84, which means there's 37 laps to go in the race. If I simply cut these 37 laps into 2 roughly equal length stints, in this case I ended up deciding on 20 and 17 laps, I could actually get a number of potentially massive benefits out of this. First and foremost, this would mean that we could have the potential to keep our car physically in front of the car that we were still fighting with. Secondly, since the car would be lighter from underfueling, this means that the tires would have to carry less weight around the track, meaning they would last us for longer. And that lighter fuel load would also give me slightly faster lap times in the first of these 2 stints. The only downside is that not only would I have to stay ahead of the 111 Porsche, I would also have to gap him by quite a significant margin to make up for the additional time that we'd be stationary in the final pit stop of the race. But just as Oskar is about to come into the pits to hand the car back to me, this happens. The LMP3 on the outside turns in a little bit too much, sending us into a spin, which unfortunately is just an LMU thing. But lucky for us, we do actually get away without hitting the wall one more time. The problem is, this incident cost us about 10 seconds. A full pit stop, in case you didn't know, takes between 70 and 75 seconds, including fuel, tires, and driving down the pit lane. Add on top of that about 8 seconds that you lose to your fresh but cold tires, and the total pit stop time comes out to about 80 seconds. Before our incident, our gap to Pavel Stehner, our direct competitor, was exactly that, 80 seconds. So in theory, I would manage to get my tires warmed up just in time for me to defend the position and then likely pull away again on the fresher rubber. Taking 30% less fuel this pit stop helped slightly with this deficit, saving us about 12 seconds on the refueling part, but it still meant that he would be able to now catch up on my outlap before I could get my tires warmed up to defend. So now, I was pretty much defenseless. And just about half a lap after that, he had already caught up to me. So after this hairpin, I decided I'm just gonna let him go, not fight it too much. I don't want to risk getting damage at this point, so I just let him through on this right-hander. But now comes the important part. I need to get tire temperature as fast as possible while not burning any extra fuel to still do the 28 laps, but every 10th I now lose to him, I'd have to later regain. A lap and a half after that, on lap 87, my tire temperatures were there or thereabouts, so now it was time to push. I now needed to gain the 4.5 seconds that I just lost back, overtake him, and then gap him by the extra 12 seconds that I decided to underfuel on the last pit stop. That's the only way I could guarantee to have my car back in front by the time all the pit stops were done. And so with just over an hour left, it wasn't exactly the easiest task, especially with all the LMPs still around. It then took me until the end of lap 92, so 5 laps later, to catch back up with Stehner, and then another lap of waiting for an opportunity. I really needed to pass him quickly, but that wasn't an excuse to be impatient and barge my way through. But just like previously, I knew that my best opportunity was going to be on the start-finish straight, so I focused on nailing the final corner to get myself as close as possible, and then overtake him here on the start-finish line. I believe at this point he wasn't quite aware of how crucial this overtake would turn out to be, but more on that a bit later. After getting past him, I turned my eyes forward. I had my work cut out for me. I needed to gap him by 12 seconds, otherwise all of this would have been for nothing. And so, I get to work. Lap after lap after lap after lap, I start to build the gap slowly but surely, until it came to my pit stop. This is where things got interesting. I had to pit before him, but after the pit stop, I still had to continue building the gap so that when he finished his pit stop, I would stay out ahead of him. So I finished my stop and continued just like before the pit stop. And just 8 minutes later, he pulls off into the pit lane.
Yeah. See the bits. He's going. But far. He's very far from the exit.
It's gonna be close.
He will be ahead. Yeah, he will be ahead. Nice. Oh my days. Nicely done.
So, I had made it by 2 seconds. The last 20 minutes were rather uneventful. I ended up closing a little bit on P1 after his pit stop, but after that, both him and I were purely managing our gaps until the end of this quite stressful 4-hour race. The leader of the LMP2s ended up overtaking us into the final corner, sparing us from doing another, at this point pretty much useless lap. Let's go!
Nice.